I don't think the speakers here need an introduction because probably you've seen them in the discussions next room. So I will explain the rules of the game, and then everybody can, then we can start playing. So each player draws 2 cards, and then it can be both colors, it can be one color. The difference between red and the 2 colors is that some are trends. I cannot tell you which one because then you'll choose biased. So some are trends or some are questions related to future. And then you choose the card or the trend or the question that is close to your interest or your heart or to your knowledge, and then you just explain and talk about that. And then the other 2 guests can also comment if they want to, and then the others do the same. All right. Okay, who wants to start?
I can draw 2 cards.
And also, yes, we have microphones. It's my bad. I know you've been talking a lot on microphones today, but it's just a little bit more.
Yeah, okay, so they're both really interesting. I'll pick this one. So the card says, would a universal basic income deployment work? I think has been a pretty relevant topic probably the past 5 to 10 years. And yeah, I've heard a lot of discussion on it. So I think it's fairly controversial, I would even say. So I guess maybe for people who don't know, universal basic income is the idea that the government gives some salary or support to, I think, every citizen or maybe a group of citizens every month to live on. I've heard this discussed in the US before. There was a presidential candidate, I think Andrew Yang, who was running on this topic. So there's some discussion there and people who supported him for that. And then I think I heard in Germany there is also some discussion on this. And I think I also heard there's an organization where you can donate money, and it's an experiment. So they're using the funds to give to a group of people as a basic income. And if you want to participate, you can donate some of your own funds there, and they give it to people, and they're basically run like a research study to see how people have been impacted by receiving this money. In general, I support it. I think it's really interesting. I am not really up to date on the research though, so I guess before like talking about it as an expert or like voting on it, I would be curious to read some more of the studies that people have done. But I think, you know, in general, people, I guess people maybe against this would say that, well, if you give people a basic income, they have no motivation to work anymore. I tend to think that people do have interests in things they want to work on, and it would be really cool, I think, to live in a society where those things are separate. Maybe people can contribute to society without having to worry about, you know, their cost of living. So I guess it's something we already do in a lot of countries in terms of like maternity funds or parent money, Elterngeld, I'm thinking from German words, yeah, to support families or people in different situations, also like support for students, so I kind of see it as maybe an extension beyond this. Yeah, those are my initial thoughts.
Okay.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah,
I don't
please.
think I need this one. Can you hear me?
But it's recorded.
Oh, it's recorded.
That's
Okay.
the reason.
All right. I think it's a super interesting topic, actually, and I have a few, wouldn't call it insights, but reflections on it. First of all, it's fun to see because it seems like it's a very socialist idea, just giving people money for basically doing nothing, right? I live in a social democrat country, and that's for me extremely valuable. But you would actually see that the ones who advocates for UBI, or universal basic income, the most are actually the most liberalist thinkers, sort of having people not rebel or having people sort of, what do you call it, keep them in place by giving them something. So it is sort of these super liberalists that really propose the idea or bring momentum to the idea this day and age. And another thing that I want to say in relation to this is that I actually, We also do publications at the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and I wrote an article, sort of opinion piece, discussion piece, whatever you want to call it, on a universal basic income on your data. So being sort of paid a universal basic income for the data you produce in the digital economy. Because after all, it is your preferences, it is your movements, it is your sort of digital asset that the whole, what can you say, surveillance capitalism idea sort of feeds on. So this whole idea of having a universal basic income on people's data was something that we played around with in thought experiments at the think tank.
But there's also some sort of exchange there. I mean, some sort of exchange. So you exchange data with that amount of...
Yeah, but it's super disproportionate.
Yes, of course, of course.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it links also up to the whole, UBI links up to the whole discussion around, okay, how do we want to measure progress in the future? Is it still in economic terms, or is it something else that we use to measure what the good life or progress actually means, beyond GDPR kind of thinking?
Yeah, I really find the idea interesting with the UBI with data. Never heard of it so far, but I think that sounds super interesting.
I'll send you my article.
Absolutely, I will read it. Especially because it also then incentivizes people to kind of be more aware with what they do and how they share and stuff like this. But also for other companies who basically live off our data. It kind of pushes them to think of other models that how they can also provide value instead of selling what we do to advertisers, basically. So I think that can have a very interesting direction. And it also could be really interesting for societies if people voluntarily share, and if we have a bigger group of that, we can see much more insights of how we behave and how it can actually help our society. I personally do it a lot. For example, I have this ring here that tracks my sleep, and that is also super cool because I can kind of have my own data, get my own insights, but that collectively could be interesting. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but these kind of things could open a lot of more discussions in how we can help improve people's life, but also how we take this whole take on data and stuff like this.
And there's also an exchange, right now we give data without, sometimes we agree, but sometimes we don't.
We don't know.
But we don't get that much from that ourselves.
It's somewhat unconscious, isn't it, the way that we handle that, and sort of the whole idea, to stay in the UBI line of thinking here, the whole idea of UBI as a concept is to sort of have the resources of society distributed in a fair way. And right now, if you look towards the digital economy that's just growing and growing and growing, it's not really being distributed in a fair way, I would claim.
Yes.
And that's where the concept becomes interesting again.
Perfect.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. Then we can move on to
Cool.
whomever wants to go next.
Let me check 2 cards.
You can read them both if you want.
Then we can vote.
Then we can vote, yes.
Both are kind of interesting. Let me just see. Yeah, I think this one is a bit more complicated, so we'll just take this one here. It's just a statement. It's no question.
It's a trend.
It's a trend. Okay.
Yes.
It says 1 billion climate crisis migrants. So on the topic of climate change, and okay, that won't really lead to a discussion, I guess, because I'm quite confident that we all have a similar view on this.
What's your opinion about that?
Say again?
What's your opinion about that?
Okay. I mean, this is something that we should basically all tackle with our specific expertise, I would say, right now. And maybe I can just give some twist on how the industry that I work in, which is some AR, VR, metaverse, kind of can help in this. And then maybe you guys can just share from your own expertise bubble, because otherwise it would just lead to we should do something about climate change, and you say yes and you say yes. So kind of a bit more interesting maybe in how our industry and our field can help in this kind of topic. I think that would make it a bit more interesting. So with metaverse, AI, and VR, there are, I think, a lot of really interesting ways how this can actually help climate change. And I don't want to talk like half an hour on this one topic here, but I think one big way is actually we can save a lot of travel time by virtually meeting as well. I mean, these kind of conferences are amazing. They're super good, and I like having them. But for example, if you just have like a meeting with someone, like a small meeting where you just like exchange hands and then you do your stuff and you travel like 20 hours for this. These are some ways where you can really do these kind of things virtually. But another thing that is extremely, extremely beneficial, and I think that is probably the main driver for how we can save, especially like travel climate issues, would be in collaborating over long distances virtually. So let's say I'm a car engineer and maybe you are the designer and you are the product manager or something like this, and we are in 3 different parts of the world. And we could all work on the same objects virtually over here, like literally just sitting next to each other, but instead of you being physically here, you are a hologram, but still from the comfort of your home. And we can work on this exact model just like we would do it in person. That would save so much time, money, headaches, travel costs, climate change, everything could be improved by this simple use case.
And how AI and your expertise could tackle the refugee crisis, because that was another section of the card.
I think that would it would take it on the root basically. So the root problem is the climate issue, and the refugee crisis is the symptom of what comes up from that. So I think tackling it on the root is already pretty essential, pretty important, I would say. On the crisis itself, I'm not 100% sure on how we would then use AR, VR technologies, because that won't prevent them from having these issues. So I think the best way would really to not have that problem at the first place by helping it in the root problem.
Okay. Any comments?
Sure, I can just share maybe some thoughts. I think Dinesh alluded to this a little bit, but the climate crisis and the idea of people having to leave and move, it's a global problem, and so I think people are already starting to view themselves as global citizens. We all live in one globe together, and I think this way of thinking is maybe part of the solution. I was just remembering, I was watching like some YouTube videos of astronauts in space and what their experience was, and they were always just talking about how once they went to space and they could see the whole Earth in one view, this was very this really impacted their view of home, and I guess the researchers even gave this a term, I don't know what the term is. And so the astronauts, when they were up there, they were amazed because they couldn't see geopolitical lines of borders of
and
countries.
Frontiers.
Yeah, and they also felt like some of them said it made it seem like the arguments of people on Earth were very minute, I guess, when you see the Earth as so small. And so I think this perspective is relevant here, refugees leaving, and if maybe we can start to think about, not as these are people from another country moving because of a situation, but try to, think of all of ourselves as global citizens, and that, this is impacting everybody. Maybe it helps us, solve some of these issues.
Yeah, and I completely attest to what both of you are saying, and it's extremely complicated to talk about and to solve mass migration. And I heard someone saying that right now we are in the age of mass displacement, whether it's because of the climate or if it's because of conflicts in Ukraine, or in Syria, Yemen, Africa.
It's also a matter of choice in the end, because there are a lot of people who have this opportunity to be a global citizen and everything is possible and you can go and work whatever. And
Sure.
It's also a matter of choice.
Yeah, but then I wouldn't call it displacement. Then
Yes.
But I agree. I completely agree. Sort of the freedom of movement and the freedom of movement becoming even more what can you say? Like if you can move without actually moving, right? You know what I mean? Then that maybe adds. Or if you have economic access, economic possibilities without actually moving or leaving, but that doesn't solve the climate issue of this part, which of course is super important. We actually, right during COVID, we at the institute we did what is called a Delphi survey, sort of a future studies method, where we sort of source inputs and try to elicit consensus among what we would call the smart crowd around a topic. One of the questions was if we would see the pandemic and the way we tackled the pandemic as some sort of a dress rehearsal for how to tackle the even more pressing issues of climate change. And actually many of the experts, or the consensus in the panel was that yes, this would actually lead to us, all of us, being able to tackle this much better. But I'm not sure we're seeing that actually. I'm not sure we're seeing that, but it'll be interesting to see. So it's two aspects of this: the whole mass migration part, and then the climate part. Two super issues.
Two big topics, actually. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a heavy card.
Really.
Okay.
Maybe just one thought on that. I think in the beginning of COVID, people said, oh, like we stopped everything for COVID, so we could obviously do this for the climate. But I think now, 2 years later, everyone is fatigued and no one, we already stopped things for COVID, so no one wants to, make people have to sacrifice things. So yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah.
Okay.
My turn.
Let's tackle two more cards and
Any
see.
difference between red and purple?
Yes, there are questions and there are trends.
Okay, so I have two here. I have one that says 3D printed organs and synthetic blood are in use. And then the other one is, what are essential skills to master in the next 3 to 5 years? And I think I'm going to go with that one, the skills one here.
Yeah, I like this one.
Yeah.
And I think also you're very interested in that.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of things to say.
I think obviously sort of the skills gap that sort of the advent of the digital economy really opens up is something that needs to be taken seriously. And how to bridge that skills gap is probably the correct question to ask here. I think we're going to see education and sort of, let's call it education, but not education in the normal sense of that you have to go to university to study for 3 to 5 years before you then work for 50 years. I don't think that model is viable anymore. Things are changing too fast. Competencies needs are changing too fast.
And also jobs.
Jobs are changing too
New
fast.
change
Exactly.
appear and go.
Exactly. So I think it's about thinking education in a much more lifelong way, much more flexible, much more sort of checking in and out whenever you need different skills. And then it's specifically asking about what are the essential skills. That's the hard skills that sort of comes with a new economic paradigm. You can probably talk much more about that. But there's also sort of the more soft skills, the more sort of cognitive skills, if you want to call them that curiosity is something that's pretty important in my line of work. Critical thinking, all of these sort of, what do you call them? I don't know what you call them in English, those type of skills.
I think soft skills.
Soft skills, yeah. Good. Some of those ones, and maybe the skill of, or the ability to learn how to learn, instead of just learning a bunch of stuff that you might need at some point in your life or in your career, but learning how to actually tap into the skills pools that you need when you need them, and so on. So you're continuously able to actually adapt. I think that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, so
Cool.
it's not something specific, but something.
It's both. I would say it's both, yeah. But it's not the just in case learning model is not going to work in the long term. That you learn a bunch of stuff in university that's almost insufficient when you leave university after 5 years, right? You obviously also learn different soft skills for going to university, right? But that actually leads me to a different point, and I'm looking at the American in the room here, because in some parts of the world, education is not necessarily easily accessible, and it costs a lot of money, right? And we are seeing, especially in the tech world, we are seeing companies starting to actually recruit based on different things than your degree paper, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
I think
And
it was worldwide.
exactly, I heard the story about, I don't remember the startup in Silicon Valley, but they actually started recruiting people based on their GitHub scores, sort of peer-to-peer. Other people that are good at coding tells you how good you are at coding, right? Instead of if you had an MIT degree that your dad maybe paid for, right? Skills over degrees.
But yeah, it is a trend with skills over degrees, because the degrees are, even the more modern ones, are still preparing for, not for the future, but for the history, for the back. Because right now, in order to implement an educational program, you have to do some studies and blah, 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 and the whole procedure behind it. But skills and knowledge and technology and jobs, as you say, are moving and growing much faster than we can adapt from a structural educational point of view. So yeah, it's hard to keep up with that.
So on a snappy note here before I leave, I definitely see the value of education increasing, but the value of degrees probably decreasing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree to, I think, pretty much all that you just said. That is exactly what I also teach my students, that it's not about the piece of paper that you hold in your hands, but much, much, much more the skills that you have. Like specifically in our industry, for example, or in the tech area, but I think in pretty much anything, if you can show what you can do, basically, it's much, much, much more valuable than anything else. So if you, I don't know, want to become an artist, then have an art portfolio. If you want to get a job in coding, then have a GitHub repository, for example. Or if you want to become a singer, then we'll have a Spotify account and sing and stuff like this. So really, like, showing what you want to do is much more important than pretty much anything else. And here also, like, I was having like 3 skills that are super necessary and essential. And yeah, there were also like learning how to learn. Pretty much the most important thing. I think that's the critical. If you can do this, you can pretty much do anything. But also staying curious. It's kind of like the necessary driver if you want to learn how to learn. But also what I think is becoming more and more important that we see, and that I've realized through my personal life, is it's extremely important and more in the future to know how to communicate well. This is something that is I don't know, probably because many mundane tasks are being automated and automation is coming. So we really have to become more creative, critical, and if we know how we can communicate ourselves, we can already have an edge about like so many others who do not learn the skill. So I also would focus much more on the soft skills and the ability to learn, and then you can pretty much do anything. And then if you build like a small portfolio piece of whatever thing you want to get into, that will probably give you the best cards, I would say.
Okay, yeah, so I'll try to remember everything that's been said already so I can comment on that. Yeah, I think in terms of education, in maybe university degrees in particular, the field is more saturated, right? Like a lot of people have degrees, and skills are important. However, I still think like a basic university education is really important. I think from my reflection, I think of university as it's kind of a space where you can learn for the sake of learning, which I think is really important. When you work for a company, then you have to do something to benefit the economy. Sometimes your thoughts are influenced by your bosses or what the company is doing or the organization is trying to do. So in my reflection, I think in university, I mean, of course, there are also professors and maybe grant money for research, but I think it's a very free space that where people can really think for themselves and explore their own ideas. And so I think this is very important. And yeah, it kind of goes into my second thought. Maybe what wasn't mentioned already is critical thinking and thinking for yourself. And I also find for myself personally, I like watching talks and videos, but I also try to remind myself, you know, don't just listen to what other people say and take it as the truth. You know, you should also think for yourself and learn how to learn. So also the resources you're using to educate yourself are, you know, from experts or have been reviewed in some sense. But I think, yeah, not necessarily looking to other people for the answers is like a special skill to try to find your own answers. And also maybe when joining a company, some people, coming from maybe a school environment, maybe it's a reflection on education, they look to someone to tell them what they should do, how to do their job, and I think what really sets people apart nowadays is people who are self-starters and who can think on their own how to tackle a problem rather than asking for someone, what they should do, what work they're supposed to do that day. Yeah.
Perfect.
Futures literacy as a skill.
Future literacy.
That's an agenda that UNESCO is really pushing at the moment. Yeah. Digital literacy, of course, as well. Like there's many literacies, health literacy, climate literacy, and whatnot. But futures literacy is really something that UNESCO is pushing, and I'm proud to say that the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, we just became the Danish hub for Teach the Future. Peter Bishop from the States, a famous futurist, started this movement, basically getting futures on the curriculum in school.
Great.
Cool.
So,
Very
yeah.
nice.
Super nice. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed this. And I hope you enjoyed this. And I think you can, and everybody can have a short break right now after all the speeches and all the really nice job that you did in the other room. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Fun.